I'm going to go ahead and officially get started. Again, my name is Lenora.
Lenora, you're muted.
Lenora, you're muted.
Automatically got muted. There we go. We're just going to start all over again. That's how we do it. All right. Once again, my name is Lenora Billings-Harris, and I am the host of More Than Just Talk. It originally started to more than just talk about race, and we have expanded it to include all types of topics that are specifically diversity, inclusion, and bias related. Today, our guest is going to share tips, techniques, and concepts about a topic that I get asked more than any other one after the question I get about how bias works. You know, what is it and all of that. The next question I always get from my clients and from attendees is how to have these critical conversations, how to talk to people about things that we would identify as being sensitive. So I want to welcome all of you who've been here before and welcome you who are here for the first time. And we hope that we're going to see you again. So let me jump right in. Just a couple of housekeeping things. So Jen and Patrice are going to be watching the chat box. So go ahead and open your chat. And as soon as you have a question, send it in. And we will do our very best to answer as many questions as come. Those questions that I'm asking Darren to begin with are questions that folks sent in during the registration when you registered on Zoom. So our guest today is Darren Ford. He is a senior professional human resource. He is a senior professional in human resources. Now, many of us in the HR world know that as the SPHR designation. And he's also a certified speaking professional. Now, what's interesting about both of those designations is they are earned designations. These are not awards that other people decide you should get. You earn them. So he had to do a great deal of work to get both of those designations. And it reflects his deep understanding of people issues in business and his ability to deliver inspiring presentations that address those issues. For over 30 years, Darren has helped people from business and personal success, help them find business and personal success across various industries. With titles such as Senior Manager of Learning and Development, Director of Employee Development, and Vice President of Culture and Engagement, he has developed people and culture programs that ignite workplace engagement, allowing people to do their best work. Darren and his family spent 4 years in Bulgaria as the headmaster of a small English-speaking school and has lived in the Dallas area for over 40 years. So he brings not only a domestic perspective, but also an international perspective. Darren, welcome and thank you for being with us to address this question that comes up all the time.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. I'm really excited to have this discussion.
Well, and Darren and I have sort of watched each other on various podcasts, and that's one of the ways that we came together, actually. And when I realized that this was his topic, very specific around having these conversations, I knew that he would be a fabulous person to have on the Zoom forum today. So I'm going to jump right into the questions.
All right.
The first one is, why are folks so afraid to talk with others, especially coworkers, around race, religion, politics, you know, all of that sensitive stuff? Why are they so afraid to have that conversation in the first place?
Well, we're jumping right in, aren't we? I wanted an easy one, like how's the weather in Dallas or something, but okay, let's go. I think there's two reasons. I think the first one is that they just don't know what to say, right? Mm-hmm. We are in polarizing times. race, politics, religion, you name it. And things are moving quickly and we just don't know what to say. But I think bigger than that, and that kind of feeds into the second reason, it's this fear. People don't want to say something out of line. And this is particularly true depending on the topic that you're discussing. So if you're a straight person having a conversation with a gay person and you say something wrong, or you don't want to say something, you don't want to be labeled a homophobic. If you're a Christian talking to a Muslim, you don't want to be labeled as a hater. If you're a white person talking to a black person and you say something, you don't want to be labeled as a racist. So I think that's why that prevents us from doing it. But here's the conundrum that we're in. We're never going to get comfortable talking about these things until we talk about them, until we pass through that uncomfortableness of talking about them. So I don't want to be as naive to sit there and say, oh, all we have to do is talk and we'll solve all of our problems. It's not quite that simple, because I think there's strategies, there's ways that we can have those good conversations. But I think those conversations are needed. And so, right off the bat, I'll tell you this, Lenora, I think there's three things that we can do that will help us have those conversations. The first one is to think the best of the other person. I think most people are generally good. And when they enter into these conversations, most people, not everyone, but most people want to have an honest conversation. I think the second kind of a mindset to have is realize that you as the speaker or you as the receiver, that we're going to stub our toe, right? If we're pushing in these areas of having these conversations, I think this is especially true. I don't know if you noticed, but I'm an old white man.
I didn't notice.
Yeah, okay, well, thank you. Okay, you didn't notice.
No, that's not a good thing when I say I didn't notice. That's just like people saying, I didn't notice you were black.
Yeah, right.
Like, how did you not notice that?
Well, as an old white man trying to have conversations about race and this diversity and inclusion in the corporate world, if I'm pushing, I am going to stub my toe at some point. I'm going to say something that I didn't mean that was offensive. And this whole thing about, well, intent, that doesn't matter. I think it does. I personally think it does. And so when I do push forward in this area to have these conversations, and when I do say something that's out of line or I stub my toe, I need grace. I mean, we all need grace, right? And so if we approach our conversations like that, thinking the best of everybody, trying our best not to stub our toe, but realizing that we want to push forward and have these discussions. And then when we do say something a little out of line, as long as you can give me grace, then we'll keep on moving forward and having those conversations.
Yeah, yeah. And what I was hearing you say, it is, we're afraid to have these conversations because all of us want to belong in some way. So because we all want to belong, then we don't want to say something that's going to hurt somebody's feelings, or we're going to say the wrong thing. And guess what? We're going to say the wrong thing sometimes, just as you said, because we can't know everything. And one of the other things that comes up when I ask that question of audiences in general is, well, I don't want to be judged. And guess what? We're all judged all the time. You're judging me right now, those of you on the call, and others, and Darren too. Maybe you don't like the outfit I have on today. I don't know. But, my point is that we're always judging other people. So if we can learn, as you said, to assume positive intent and then lean into that discomfort.
Can I jump in and add one more comment? The other thing to keep in mind is, as we're having these conversations, we're having them from a perspective of life, right? I mean, I've got a lot of years behind me as I get older every day, but in fact, I'll tell you right now, for everybody who's watching, here's my perspective, right? I'm male, I'm white, I'm a Christian, I'm a conservative, and I'm straight, right? I guess those are kind of some of the big ones. And so everything I say, it's going to come from 60 years of being that. Mm-hmm. Right. And so, and nobody can do anything about that, right? Everybody listening has that same background. Now, again, we want to overcome some of those things, right? You can learn new things for sure. And we'll talk more about that later, probably. But we all have that angle. But again, I just go back to, if we just think the best of people and that we're all trying, and then, and then when we need it, give us a break. That would go so far in having these really good conversations.
I know there are some folks though that are walking around just waiting for you to knock off that chip that's on their shoulder.
That's true.
And they don't really want to have a conversation. So question number 2. Well, it relates to number one. Why right now, in the environment we're in now, with COVID and with protests and with, politics and all of these things that are going on, why are people so edgy and angry? Why do you suppose they are?
I think that's a great question. I think there's two reasons. I think the first one, and they both have the word media in them. I think the first one is mainstream media. I think we're just bombarded every day on both sides, right? I mean, the left side, the right side, Reddit, Yahoo, wherever you get your news, it's just all bad. I mean, we hear bad news all right. Bad news sells. I get it. I know that's why the media does that. But I think there's so much. I personally don't think that the world is as bad as we're being led to believe, or as it is as we read about it. Don't get me wrong. We have our issues. We have our differences for sure. But we never hear the good stories. We never hear about the neighbor helping the neighbor. We sometimes do, like in a time of disaster, right? But for the most part, we hear this constant barrage of bad news, bad news, bad news. And I think that's one thing that kind of gets in their way and makes everybody kind of edgy. And the other media is the social media. Lenora, we say things, or we type things out, in 240, 280 characters that we would never say to somebody face to face. I remember I was looking at following an HR professional one time, or I still do. And this was way back when COVID first started. And they started talking about some really ugly things about President Trump, and don't wear the mask, and walk around your administration and walk around all your supporters and see if they get sick, and let's see what happens to them. And it was kind of over the top. And I never have done this before. I always keep my blogs or my tweets to be business oriented, but I just didn't think it was right. So I just very carefully waded into that Twitter feed, and I said, with all due, I think it was almost verbatim, with all due respect, these comments are over the top. I never agreed with any of President Obama's policies, but I never wished ill on him. And of course, there was a couple of people who started backing up, in the tweets, that they didn't really mean what they meant. But yeah, I think between media and then the mainstream media and social media, it's not helping. It's really not helping. And so on, then we're on edge.
Yeah. And speaking of the media and the information that we get and we're bombarded with it, is going to relate to another question that's going to come up in just a little while. But I want to move to something that I think is positive. At least from your perspective.
Okay.
On your blog, I did some research on you before today.
Stalking me.
Yeah, I was stalking you. I was definitely stalking you. So on one of your blog posts, you said that you think businesses make a difference by encouraging these types of dialogues. Why?
Because it's the only place, and I try to stay away from absolute, but it's primarily the only place where we don't have a choice of the people that we rub elbows with or that we sit next to. I mean, think about everything outside of the business world. Our social groups tend to look like us, and not always, right? And there might be one or two people who don't look like you, but for the most part, the civics groups that we belong to, they kind of look like us. The friend groups that we hang out with tend to look like us. The churches that we go to tend to look like us. And that's okay, and really that's okay, right? I know the church I go to here in North Dallas, it's a large church and it's primarily a white church. And now we have an Hispanic pastor, and we do a service in Spanish, and we would love for more Hispanic or for Black people to come through our doors and worship. But why would they? We don't worship like a Black church worships, and that's okay, right? So outside of work, we tend to kind of be the birds of a feather flock together. But at work, sometimes we're the hiring manager, and we get to hire somebody and choose who that person is. But for the most part, we're surrounded by people who are hired, and they may look different, think differently, have very different views from us. And so I think business has, with that, if business wants to have a successful business, I think it's, selfishly, for high performance, they need to make sure that people can get along. But I just think it's also their responsibility. I mean, let's face it, we spend over half of our adult life, awake life, at work. We've got to do what we do well, but we've got to enjoy it. And I think business has the responsibility and the ability to help people have these conversations and get along.
Well, one of the things that motivates me to do this work in this time is that different than pre-COVID and pre-George Floyd, where, I've been doing this work for almost 30 years, and I deliver keynotes or have workshops or even, do some consulting. There's a different vibe now with the clients that I'm working with. They're sincerely wanting to learn.
Absolutely.
Where before, I think it was more of a check the box, and they also thought they knew everything. And so from the perspective of what you were saying earlier is, you're white, you're straight, you're Christian, you're, all of these things. That's your life experience and your perspective. What I'm finding with the C-suite folks, who are mostly white males, is that when they participate in the listening sessions that I facilitate for them, they are blown away because they hear perspectives from their employees that they just never knew was reality for them. So it's opening their eyes, because you have to be curious in the first place, but it's opening their eyes, and to the point of businesses can make this work and they have an obligation. What my experience is over this last year is that many of the senior leadership team members really do want to create that inclusive, safe workplace. They want that. What they're having to learn is how to do that, including how to have these sensitive conversations.
You're exactly right. I'm seeing the same thing. Absolutely.
Yeah, because they realize they don't know how to have them.
They don't have the skills, right?
And one other point on that, when you were talking about different places of worship, I often will recommend to people, one of the ways you get to know people different than you is if you happen to practice a religion, then go to a different place of worship. And sometimes you're like, really? I could do that?
Can I do that?
I don't think, and I said, you're proving my point is the stereotypes you have in your head, the biased thoughts you have in your head about other religions or other faiths.
Right.
You're assuming that's going to happen. So that's why you need to go to see that you'll be welcomed and all of those kind of things. We're all human beings.
Yeah.
All right. So the next question is, how should leaders and allies, all of us are leaders in some way, but how should leaders and allies initiate these conversations? So with their teams, for instance.
Carefully. Right. Really, that's what it is. I think they have to, again, kind of like to your point, that employees are kind of forcing this because they want it, right? This whole idea that we want our employees to look. Older people like me, baby boomers, we had that work-life separation, right? Growing up, early on in my career, I had a boss who said, "Hey, see that stop sign out by the corner? Leave all your," well, he had a colorful word. He said, "Leave all your junk there, right? And you can pick it back up on the way home." Right? And that's how we approach work. And I think today, though, it's this work-life integration, right? We, especially now that with COVID and we work from home, we weave in and out of work and life just kind of fluidly all day long. And so we have to have those conversations, and we have to bring our whole selves to work. And kind of going back to, I think business has a responsibility to do that. But how do you do that? How does a leader do that? And I kind of stand by my first word, carefully. But I think what they have to do is just acknowledge the world that we live in, and whether it be a current event that just happened, or or an election, or whatever's going on around us, we have to acknowledge that as a leader. And a leader says, like, we need a time out here, and let's talk about this. Let's process this. Let's work our way through this. So I don't think you hide it. I don't think you dance around it. I think a leader needs to be very intentional and deliberate. And once they set that stage of oh, and by the way, let me say this, hopefully, the leader has been doing work over time to build trust. Sometimes you're a new leader and you don't have that time behind you, but hopefully you're not entering into this conversation cold. You've spent time building the relationships which will allow you to have those conversations. But once you're in that, I think you have to set up this is what I teach, whether I do it on a one-on-one team meeting or even kind of like running a town hall. Set up some guidelines, and have some boundaries. all opinions are welcome, and all feelings. And by the way, and especially the feeling part, right? The emotions, they have to be welcome and they have to be acknowledged. Say that, look, don't make it personal. No name calling. Let's agree to, sometimes we might have to call a timeout and pause. Set it, and then maybe we have to say, in the end, let's agree to disagree, or let's agree to continue the conversation later. But I think if you set those guidelines up, if you come into it and you're very deliberate and say, we need to talk about this, set up the rules, and then have the conversations. My experience is that more often than not, they go well. And I'm not saying that they're easy, and I'm not saying that they're not emotional, but they go well. And by well, I mean, we're bringing people together and we're getting a better understanding of each other.
Well, and I think that one of the things that as adults we need to unlearn is that when we're specifically wanting to be in these sensitive, critical conversations, that if you're going into it trying to change the mind of the other person, then it's probably not going to work.
Yeah.
Because sensitive conversations have people already based in their values. Those things that are most likely not going to change. But if you go into it truly being inquisitive, I really want to understand, then you'll be more likely to make some headway, because it doesn't need to be about converting someone or changing their perspective, but rather broadening both people's perspective. Yeah. And that means you have to listen without waiting for somebody to put a period at it so you can jump right in. And that's hard to do. And for leaders, the question being, how do you even have these? How do you initiate the conversations? Leaders are so accustomed to see a problem, fix a problem.
Yep. Yeah.
When it comes to people management, and particularly diverse populations around sensitive topics, it has to be see the problem, but kind of the head focus, but then it has to go through the heart focus 18 inches lower before you get to the hard work of action. And that's what leaders are not that comfortable doing. So one of the things that I share with them just on their regular meetings, especially virtually, because they go right into the task and then jump off that call and get immediately into another one.
Right.
Is that, make it an agenda item to spend 10 minutes just asking people how they're doing. That doesn't mean you jump into a tough topic, but ask and really listen. That may lead to a topic that you might want to talk about, right, and maybe have to make some separate time for it. But it goes back to what you were saying, is building that trust. You have to build the trust first. You don't have that, they're not going to have that conversation with you.
Exactly. And it builds on itself. The more you have those conversations, the more trust. Those are trust building exercises. You said something I thought was really, really key, is that curiosity. If I were to pick one, I don't know, mindset or skill to develop, or I don't know what the right word is, but it would be for people to have just a curiosity about other people. People are fascinating, and I'm sure you've experienced this and you know this, but not everybody thinks people are fascinating. I think they are, right? I'm one of those people who like to sit at the state fair and watch people walk around. I just think people are fascinating, and I can't tell you, Lenora, how many coffees I've had over my life, and for different business reasons or personal reasons, or I used to be in sales, selling, whatever. And just to sit and talk to people and hear life stories. And I'm sure over all my life that there's probably been a handful of those coffees that were, I probably walked away saying, well, that was a waste of time. I don't remember them, but I'm just out of the sheer number, there has to be a few. But for the most part, if nothing else, you spend an hour having coffee and learning and smiling and laughing and learning about somebody else's perspective. I think having that curiosity about the people who are walking around you, or that you interact with every day, I think that would go if we enacted on that curiosity. In other words, if we had these conversations and we found out about other people, we'd realize that there's more that connects us than separates.
Exactly. It's about instead of being cultural critics, becoming culturally curious. To learn about others. Well, I know Jen has some questions that folks have sent in. So Jen, I'm going to turn it to you so you can share a couple of those questions with us.
I do. I have several questions, and I'm going to first ask you the one that was most recently talked about. You mentioned your listening sessions. that you have had recently with C-suite? And how are you seeing the learning and listening sessions by C-suite changing their DE&I work strategies or for a better sense of belonging and safety?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So the listening sessions are with different demographic groups. So it could be people of color, could be Black people specifically, then with women. To this morning, I had one with the way it was identified was European ancestry, Caucasian. In other words, white folks, but they want to say it that way, right? I'm always I can see you, Halima, laughing, right? But they tiptoe around that one, and I'm always telling my clients, if you're going to have listening sessions with all these other demographic groups, then you can't be ignoring white folks because they have concerns that they want to share too. But the point is, the listening session is with the team members, the employees, and then the way I set them up for my clients is there'll be one or two executives from the C-suite. And so I first have to teach them how to listen. That means after you do your introduction and you tell a story, maybe you don't say anything else, which is hard for leaders, but they just listen to everything else, and then I facilitate the conversation. So to your question, inevitably, after every listening session, and the leaders will share it and in the close with the people on that call, how much they appreciated people having the courage to speak candidly, because I set it up to say, okay, folks, we don't need generalities. We can't fix that. I need you to be really specific. Don't need to tell us names, but be really specific about what your day is like at work and in your community. And the leaders really recognize that they don't know everything. And that's one of the things I coach them on is you've got to be willing to be vulnerable. So they know that they don't know everything. And then if they already have a strategic plan in place, they go back, look and work with either head of HR or their DE&I director or VP or whoever it is to make sure what they're hearing in those listening sessions get incorporated into actions to make things better. And sometimes things come up in the listening session that need immediate action. So I'll give you one quick example. A client of mine that is located around the world, but they're headquartered in Houston, actually in Dallas. In Texas, not far, of course, where you are, Darren. And in the first listening session, it was not that long after George Floyd's murder. So it was all Black people. And the two Black men shared their experience at work and how they feared for their life because of where they had to go. I don't want to give away the client or even what industry it was, but they had to go to a part of the country and a part of the company where mostly everybody was white. And the things that were said directly to them or in earshot of them was just horrendous. And the CEO was on that call. Right after that call, he went to HR so they could do an official investigation. They did it quickly, and 5 people were fired. Of course, that went through the organization like light fire, right? And every listening session after that, no matter who the group was, somebody would make a point of saying, I believe that you are walking your talk because I heard what happened at blah, blah, blah. And I know that was a tough decision because some of the people that got let go had been with the company for many years, high performers, all of that. And so my point is, if leaders are willing to do the work of listening to those stories and also do other work, there's lots of other education that they need to do on their own, not just talking to people, it does reframe their thinking. And it helps them know, because at least the ones that I'm working with, they already know that having a diverse and inclusive workplace increases their bottom line and their creativity and all of that more so than their competitors who are not as diverse. They know that in their head, but they haven't quite figured out in their heart how then to put it into action. But after they have listening sessions or focus groups or, whatever term they choose to call them, it does change them. It changes me. I keep hearing, keep thinking I've heard pretty much everything. And every time I hear something I haven't heard before. Thank you so much for that question. Let's take one more question before we go back to our list of questions that were sent in ahead of time.
Okay. So a question for Darren, from your experiences, research and interactions, how do you think or feel that biases are formed in the first place?
How are they formed in the first place?
Takes me about 90 minutes to answer that question, Darren. I want to see you do it quickly,
yeah.
right?
Right.
So the 5-second version.
So, well, I think it's we kind of touched on it earlier, right? I've been building my opinions and my biases for 60 years. Oh, you probably couldn't tell I was 60, right? Yeah. I mean, I'm old. When I say I'm old, I'm serious. I'm old.
Seasoned. I'm way older than you, so you're just seasoned.
See, there you go. So, I mean, we've been developing those, for our entire life. And again, I'll pick on media again too. I think that has a big impact on what, especially if you only listen to one channel, right, or one viewpoint. And Lenora, you talked about Lenora going in and going to another church. How about just flipping it to another news station? Try and hear more, hear other opinions. And so our stereotypes and our biases are built up over an entire lifetime. And that's why you talk about unconscious bias. We're not going to turn this into an unconscious bias discussion, but they come out immediately the first time, and you can't do anything about it. You can't help your first thought. You can help your second thought, right? And that's where we spend all of our time, is making sure that second thought doesn't continue the first thought, which may not have been right. Does that make sense? I hope it does.
Well, and just a quick example that might help, because when I am presenting on this topic or running workshops, the critical thing to understand, and as someone in a listening session this morning was saying, and it's built into my DNA. He was describing himself pretty much the way you described yourself, with all those different diversity dimensions. And he said, so it's built into my DNA. And he was being positive, actually. And so finally I said, after he finished talking, I said, I really have to make a comment here, because thank goodness it is not built into our DNA. It is, however, connected to our emotions. So our brain's job is to keep us alive. So but depending on the stuff we have in what I call our personal database in the cloud, meaning in our head, depending on what's in there, all those stereotypical thoughts or whatever, when we're under stress, our brain is going to go to fear. So fight, flight, or freeze. And we're going to believe whatever it grabs. So the good news, though, why it's not in our DNA, is when we have those thoughts, we can reframe them. And the example I use is my grandmother. I lived with her for a few years when I was very little. And so when I was 5, 6, 7 years old, she always told me, don't talk to strangers. Well, that made sense when I was that little. I grew up in Newark, New Jersey. It would not be a good thing for little kids to talk to strangers, right? But as an adult, although I may still hear her voice telling me that when I approach someone who I don't know, or they're approaching me, I know that it doesn't apply now. So we have to reframe, take a deep breath, and get into our system 2 thinking, is what it's called, is to get into that part of our brain that can make decisions in the moment for right now, not based on what happened 30 years ago. Right. So you're going to have those messages. You can't get rid of them, but you can reframe them. You can respond instead of just reacting. Right.
And the other thing is, and again, it's all kind of tied into one big, hairy monster. Let's go back to the curiosity of people. And in my keynote presentation, I talk about some strategies of how do you build this a culture where people are valued. And L, when I talk about L, it's listening, but not just listening to the words. It's listening to the head and the heart. And in fact, if I may, I'm going to wade out into really deep waters right now. When I'm doing a presentation, I've taught for 30 or 40 minutes before I get to this point. So we're close to that. So hopefully I've built a little trust with the people who are watching. I'm very transparent, and vulnerable, and I tell them my own journey in one particular area, which is white privilege. You know, it's only been, at least in my vernacular, in my world, it's a relatively new term, right? I mean, 3 or 4 or 5 years is when I've been really talking a lot about it. When I first heard that term, I thought it was a political agenda or something. I just didn't believe in it. And maybe I didn't understand it is the better way to put it. But what I did is I started talking to I was very intentional, and I went to my friends, my Black friends, and I talked to them about it. And, you know, we're all on a journey. So I listened to their stories of what it was like to be pulled over by a policeman, what it's, you know, for no other reason that they can think of other than their skin color, what it's like to watch, you know, a fellow Black man being killed on a, you know, you could be at DFW and watching the monitors at baggage claim. And if a story comes on like that, you're spending time as a Black man or a woman thinking about that, you know, and then so my immediate thought is, well, I've never spent time doing that. You know, I've put more time into and thought and energy in how to be a better husband, a better worker, a better father. Is that white privilege? Certainly that's part of it, but there's more than that. And so my point is this: I listened with the idea that I want to really learn, and I'll change my mind, or I'm open to changing my mind. And the way I did that is I just listened to stories. I listened to hearts. I listened to people. And you know, you can say that's simplistic, and I think it's that simple. I think you got to have a willingness, right? You got to be vulnerable and admit where you're falling short, and have those conversations, and engage. And you talk about tough conversation, man. The first time I ever told that story on a stage in front of an audience, it was hard, right? And even here, it's still kind of hard. But that's where I am, right? I'm on my journey, and we're all on that journey. So, man, if we just, it's all about the dialogue. It's all about the connection. It's all about the listening, and it's all about the heart. And
well, and I think it's a step on the journey. So doing that deep listening is part of it. It's not the only thing, but it is part of
absolutely.
One of the things. Now, given what you just shared, I'm going to jump to this next question.
Uh-oh. Okay.
Because this has happened so much. And I have my Black friends coming to me telling them how they feel when it happens. But from a white male perspective who talks about sensitive conversations, I would like your perspective. So here it goes. What suggestions do you have for this situation? White folks want to understand the Black experience. So they approach 1 or 2 Black friends or colleagues and then ask 20 questions, expecting the Black person to do all the teaching. So what are your comments?
So I'd like to tell you that was never me.
Except you wouldn't be truthful.
But I would, yeah, right. I think telling the truth is important. And so I have actually done that. In fact, I can remember one time I was sitting at it's called a Hilton Anatole. It's here in Dallas. It's close to downtown. And I had a new friend that I really didn't know very well. And in fact, Lenora, you know him, James Pogue. And we sat for almost 2 hours, and I just peppered him with questions. And he was so gracious, you know, because I was asking them from a white guy's perspective, questions that needed, I had questions. And that wasn't the right way to do it, because I really didn't know James. Again, he was very gracious. So I think the first step for white people, or for, if we're going to say Black and white for white people, is do your homework first. And there's so many ways you can do your homework. In fact, I would say read the books that are out there. Go get, if you're in business, you know, go to LinkedIn and watch what Lenora writes, and look at postings. And once you've done your homework and you've done your best to understand on your own, then I think it's okay to find somebody who's a Black person that hopefully you already have a relationship with. I would never advocate just walking up to a stranger, hey, can you teach me some things, right? I would not do that. So hopefully you have a relationship with somebody, and ask permission. And I would say, as you ask permission, put that caveat in there and say, look, this is what I want. This is what I need. I'm hoping you can help. There is no expectation. And if this isn't something that you feel comfortable or have the energy to do or want to do for any reason, I won't be offended if you say no. Give them that opportunity to say, I just can't do that now. And some people might take you up on that. I've got a couple of people that I know that they're kind of my race coaches. And I've talked to them many times about this, but I got their permission to do it. And I try actually not to overuse their, their graciousness, because it's, and I mean, Lori, I'm sure you have an answer to that, but that's from my perspective. Is if I were coaching a white person, I'd say, do your homework first, find somebody you already have a relationship with, and ask them permission to enter into these conversations. And
yes, so I do agree. You absolutely need to do your own homework first. And what I get pushback on, not in a negative way, but busy executives are saying, oh, geez, I love to read, but I can't tell you the last time I read a book because I don't have time. And so then I say to them, subscribe to audiobooks, subscribe to Blinkist. In other words, I don't let them get off the hook. If you want to get some information, there's more than one way to get it. You don't have to sit down with a 500-page book. Right. There's plenty of podcasts. Use YouTube. I mean, there's so many things. And it's not just about race. I mean, this is what you need to do when you're trying to learn about any group that's different than you. The first step is the knowledge. Then the second step is where you get some additional understanding, but don't go to talking to anybody yet. The second step is understanding, where you do some additional work, like going to places where you're the only one. So that's where going to a place of worship different than your own, if you happen to practice a faith, that's where that happens. Because when you get to feel what it's like to be the only one, from a black-white perspective, you finally get to feel what it's like for me and other folks like me, where I'm the only one most of the time. I mean, I don't even think about it anymore because it's so much a part of my world, but you get a sense of what that is like. Once you've done those two things, got some knowledge, been around, been the other, then you're ready to have a conversation, because now you've got some questions with context. So in my view, that's the process. And one of the things additionally, I thought that was very critical that you said, is to go to somebody you already know, don't have this conversation with a stranger, and ask permission. But here's the thing in asking the permission: be mindful of who it is you're asking, because they may feel as though they can't say no, just depending on the level of trust that you already have. Now, if you've got a really good relationship with them and you have some trust built up, then that's the best situation. What I find that happens in the workplace very often, though, is that the leaders think they have a good relationship just because they've said hello every day in the hallways pre-COVID. And then they go and talk to that employee. And of course, the employee is going, and the other thing is, it puts that person, whether it's the Black person or the person of a different religion, whatever it is, it puts them on the spot as though they're an expert in teaching everything about their culture. So we want to also recognize that some people are exhausted. And so if they say, you know what, I just really don't want to talk about that, we really, really need to respect that and be willing to move on to the next person, hopefully, if there is one.
Yeah, that's why I said put that caveat in there and give them permission to back out. And by the way, one thing, a lot of what we're talking about here is business related. So I would coach leaders not to go to somebody on your team who reports to you below you, because they, to your point, Lenora, they may sit there and say, well, it's my boss, I've got to talk to him. Right. So I would coach a leader not to do it on somebody on their team. Find somebody outside of that team. Now, do you want to have a talk with your group about what it's like, current events, and what it's like to work in this company? That's a little bit of a different conversation that probably needs to be had. But for this education thing, I would not go to somebody on my team. I wouldn't coach a leader to do that. Find somebody who's outside of your team.
So I want to, I know that you have some key points to share with us around the word value, and I don't want to run out of time and not have time for that. So I'm going to ask you another question out of order. Okay. And this one, where'd it go? Oh, so you've had some people say to you, turn down your whiteness. Now, I've had people say to me, years ago, I think nobody had the nerve to say it to me now, but I've had people say to me, don't be so Black.
Right.
I won't tell you what my answer is. I want to hear what your answer is when people say, turn down your whiteness.
Well, it's funny. I wrote a LinkedIn post about this not too long ago, and actually got into, I won't say trouble, that's too strong of a word, but I had I had a couple people take exception to one of the words I used, and rightly so. But it said, look, I'm white, right? In fact, I was kind of joking. I said, it's because I use, SPF 500 when I go out in the sun. I'm like really white, and I wish I could turn down my whiteness, but I was born this way. I didn't have a choice. And in this post that I put out there, I said, I don't even know what it means to turn down my whiteness. And frankly, it kind of ticks me off. And so that was the word ticked, as somebody said, you seem defensive and angry. And so that was, again, I tried to listen, and that was, remember, so there I go, stubbing my toe, trying to wade out in these waters. And I said, you're right, that wasn't the right word. Frustrated probably would have been a better word. But my point kind of stayed the same in that I don't know how turning down me elevates somebody else, a Black person or anybody else who's different than me. Mm-hmm. I would rather focus on elevating all of us. And that's where I put my efforts, whether I'm talking about building, corporate cultures, these kind of conversations that we're having. I'm me. We kind of touched on this a couple of times in the last 45 minutes or so. I've got 60 years worth of being me, and I don't really apologize. I was born white. I was born male. I'm not proud of either one, but I don't apologize for them. I am who I am. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I don't know that turning down whiteness or turning down me is the way that we're going to all, be together and start coming together and understanding each other.
Well, and frankly, it's totally the opposite of creating that inclusive environment where people can be authentically who they are.
Absolutely.
And when you tone down who you are, that doesn't really elevate other people. And even back when I was in corporate environment and people thought they were giving me good advice and they were telling me to tone down my Blackness, because I started out with a massive afro. So that kind of was where they were coming from. But what it did for me is it helped me really clarify my values. Mm-hmm. It helped me really think about what am I willing to do to fit in, to belong, versus what am I just not willing to do? Well, right. I still got my hair natural. I just don't have much of it anymore. I think sometimes people think they're being helpful when they say that, when they're actually saying you're not okay the way you are. And that's what we need to deal with. So, okay, a couple more questions I think we can squeeze in before we get to value. Jen, you've got a couple more questions.
Indeed, I do. So I actually have a lot, but I know you can't fit them all in. So we'll have to follow up with those later. But one of the questions is, how do you respond when someone presents a misconception as a fact?
Okay, you don't have an hour.
Yeah, right.
Short version, just
all
a
right.
little.
Let's see. Wow, the short version on that is
like
golly, I think something. It comes down to dialogue and conversation. I think you've got to spend some time figuring out. Right, somebody else's truth is not a fact; it's an opinion. An opinion, right? Facts are wrong. Right. There was a time in life when the government told us that asbestos was good for us. Right. I mean, they presented it as a fact, but that wasn't true. Right. And so, I think if somebody's that's what they believe for whatever reason. And I think it comes down to a dialogue. I think you just need to find some time to sit down, and maybe you have to set those boundaries up to say, hey, let's talk about this. This is serious. I disagree with you. I don't see life that way. Whatever. Let's talk about this. Here are some of the boundaries, and then see if you can arrive at the truth in a respectful way. And at the end of the time, again, I didn't used to like this, but I'm okay with this now, to say, to agree to disagree. Sometimes you need to do that, and for the sake of the relationship, rather than, I've read too many accounts of people letting their differences of politics ruin friendships and defriend from Facebook and not talking to mom. And right, we can't let those things get in the way of talking to mom.
Well, I was just, one of the things that I talk about in my presentations is to, when something comes up and somebody's saying something that you believe is totally not true based on whatever your truth is that, again, we're trying to jump in there and change their perspective, right? And so all of that negative energy just makes the other person dig in. And so one of the suggestions that I give to people is to respond with a question. So rather than, you're wrong and all of that, is help. That's not my experience. Help me understand why you see it that way. And one of my favorite shows is Shark Tank. And I was watching it last night. And what you just described, or the question that we're talking about right now, actually came to life where, and I won't say which two people, there was a guest shark on who knows technology. And he thought he was absolutely right about this contestant's product. And he was saying, no, it's out there already. This is not unique. It's so easy to do this. It had to do with real estate and opening doors, locked doors for a house you want to see. And so I'll tell you, the regular guy that was on there, Mark Cuban, he ended up making a deal with the guy. So after the contestant left, they were at it and the cameras kept rolling. So Mark was saying, well, no, you're not right. This is unique. And he went through all these things, and the other guy was just going at it. So they're sitting on either end. And so finally, Barbara, who is a realtor, she said, can we please just agree to disagree? Of course, there was man speak, so they spoke right over her.
Oh,
They paid no attention.
I can see that happening.
They kept on going, but of course that made for good TV, all
Yes,
that negativity that we
Right.
talk about. So it's be willing to take a breath and figure out some questions you can ask, because you're both in your emotional state.
Mm-hmm.
So if you ask a question, that forces the other person to be in their logical state. Now, they may still be angry, but at least you'll lower the maybe you'll lower the temperature. You at least have a chance at that.
Along with that, maybe the first question is, really, that's interesting. I haven't thought about that. Let me think about that, and let's talk about it later.
Yes, make it another time. Exactly.
Time. Yeah.
Because we're so crunched for time, like we are now. Jen, you have another question?
Yes, I do. So this is a difficult one, so you'll have to make this one concise as well. How do you measure the change in what metrics are working in diversity and that sort of thing, in dialogue and work culture?
That's been the challenge with culture for years. One of the reasons I think culture was kind of that 4-letter word for a long time is because it was hard to measure, and still is to a large degree. How do you know that all this money I'm putting into building a culture that's engaging and fun and healthy and exciting and permits employees to be engaged? How do you know it's working? So from a diversity standpoint, I think it's much easier. And Lenora, you probably have more knowledge about this than I do, but we can track metrics. I can track the demographics of who I'm hiring and who I'm promoting and how many men, women, black, white we have in our company. So those are easy. It's all that other, I don't want to call it soft stuff, but touchy feely stuff. That's the hard part. And I think you do that through, engagement surveys, there's all kinds of tools out there now, pulse surveys, trying to get people's opinions. And so I think you just have to pick the metrics and the tools and the questions that you're trying to ask and measure that and do it and commit to doing it on a regular basis. Don't do it once and say, oh, look at the scores. Our scores are really good. And then be done. Right? Because
I think one of the things that, and I'm always telling leaders this, the one missing link when they're doing this work and they have these beautifully written diversity and inclusion and equity strategies, and then all of these actions, the missing link is they do not identify the KPIs, the key performance indicators to hold themselves accountable, not just with the metrics, because frankly, that's the easier part.
That's the easier part, right?
But because you can look at turnover, you can look at your how is your recruiting different? Are you bringing more people in that are diverse, that kind of thing. But to your point, the inclusion part is harder to measure, but it's not measurable, because that's where you want to listen to the stories, where you want to get a sense of what's the pulse of each of the locations where you are. Mm-hmm. What are the unwritten rules? Mm-hmm. I have that conversation with executives as well, because they don't think there are any. But what are those unwritten rules that help people get ahead, and are only certain people getting ahead? So you start paying attention to all those things, and you hold leaders accountable for how included their whole team feels. When you start measuring that, leaders pay attention, because then they start realizing, oh, this is not just that nice thing to do. This is really what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah, I think that's one of the measurements that you can take, Lenora, is measuring the activities that those leaders are doing. Are they having the town halls? Are they doing their listening tours? Are they doing those things that we know lead to positive outcomes? And again, hold set up the strategies that you want to do, the activities you want to do, and then and just make sure that you hold yourself or somebody in the company hold you responsible for doing those.
I just looked at the time. Oh my gosh, it goes so fast. I want you to tell us about what value stands for.
Very quick. So my passion is to help organizations build a culture where people are valued for who they are. And so I've taken the word value, and each letter has a meaning. V is for viewing people, and I think it starts with this. I think it's why I love it's the first letter. It's viewing people as unique and important. It starts with that, viewing people as unique and important. A is for assisting people in small ways, big ways, being a servant leader. We already talked about L. L is listening with the idea, not on a scale of 1 to 10, even though that's important, but listening with the idea of changing your mind. U is understanding that we have more that connects us than separates us. And E is explain somebody's value. And I in other words, tell them. I mean, I wanted a T, but it didn't spell anything, so I had to go with E and go with explain somebody's value. But just look, you're going to tell people sometimes in the presentations, I often have the audience do a text, to pull out their phones, and we send a text to somebody that needs to hear you're valued, or that they're valued. And I've heard some wonderful stories. I remember one lady came up to me, and I don't remember what she texted her son of why she valued him, but she goes, I texted my adult son, I valued him for this. And he wrote back and he goes, Mom, thanks. I've never heard you say that before. So when you text somebody or when you tell somebody they're valued, you may be doing it to somebody who hasn't heard it this week, this month, this year, or in that person's, position their whole life. So it's kind of a rich thing to do at that moment. It's a lot of fun. You get some funny answers, but you also get some.
So we're going to challenge everyone as soon as this call is over.
Please do
quickly text someone and tell them how much you value them.
Yes.
And Darren, in case people want to get directly in touch with you, what is the easy, fast way to do that?
Well, probably the easiest way is through LinkedIn. All my contact information is there. I've got a website. It's Darren K, as in Keith, DarrenKFord.com. My email address is Darren, D-A-R-R-E-N, Darren at DarrenKFord.com. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to be connected. Let's talk to each other, and let's see where our conversation goes.
Continue that conversation, you bet.
Absolutely.
Well, it has been a joy. The time flew. We could have talked for another hour. I thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Before we totally close, I want to just let everyone know that we already have the next one scheduled. It's June 18th. Put it on your calendar. The links and everything will go out very soon, early next week. We're going to have Dr. Joseph L. Graves. He is the preeminent expert, author, and professor on the construct of race. So we're finally going to have a conversation about, is race in our DNA or not? So stay tuned. We'll see you next month. Thank you so much for being with us. And again, Darren, it was just a joy. Thank you so much.
Totally honored. Very fun. Appreciate it. And let's keep talking. Take care.
We shall. Bye, everyone. Stay safe and healthy. We usually try to just stay off until everyone else is gone.
Right.